Ziglar, you going first?
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, I appreciate the invitation to appear today to assist in your effort to establish a complete and accurate record of the events leading up to September 11th and the actions that were taken in the aftermath. As you know, my first day as Commissioner was August the 6th, 2001, 1 month and 5 days before the attacks of September 11th. Consequently, I have little to offer in terms of your investigation of events occurring before September 11th. In my written testimony, I have attempted to tell the story of the INS's response to September 11th and the story of our efforts to improve our performance in the many areas for which we had jurisdiction. It's been 14 months since I retired from federal service, so I hope you understand that I did not have access to records or staff in preparing my testimony. I did my best to be as thorough as possible with the resources and records and the time available. When I was first approached about the possibility of taking the Commissioner's job in March 2001, it was explained to me that the President was looking for someone with management experience to fulfill two mandates. These mandates were based upon promises that the President had made during the campaign. The first was to restructure and reform the INS by separating the service and enforcement functions to create more accountability, effectiveness, and efficiency. The second was to reduce the backlog of applications and petitions to an average processing time of not more than 6 months. When I entered the INS building on August the 6th, 2001, I felt a sense of great urgency about moving forward with the restructuring. I knew from my experience as an Assistant Secretary of the Interior during the Reagan administration that moving quickly in a new job and getting buy-in from employees for major change were necessary to success. It worked for me in restructuring the Bureau of Reclamation, and I had high hopes that it would work here. In my first month in the office, I spent most of my time learning about the INS bureaucracy, directing the process of creating a restructuring plan, and talking to and with employees about the need for fundamental change. In fact, in my first 30 days, I met with every employee in the Washington area through a series of group meetings and question and answer sessions, and I used our audio and video communications capacities to reach out to those in the field. The restructuring task force that I put into place within the first 48 hours of joining the INS worked diligently through the month of August to fashion a restructuring plan that met the President's goals and that would rebuild the INS to achieve accountability and effectiveness. We drew heavily on the work that had been done before, including a good restructuring plan that had been proposed by Commissioner Meisner. On September the 10th, we delivered our proposed restructuring plan to the Attorney General. September 11th obviously changed the focus of our efforts at the INS. From that day on, we were engaged in participating in the investigation of the events that transpired. We were working to prevent any further terrorist attacks. We were developing and implementing new initiatives to increase our effectiveness. And we were actively engaged in hardening our borders to prevent the entry of terrorists in the United States. And I use the term borders in a very broad sense. In my written statement, I have attempted to give you at least a partial summary of the many actions that we took in these regards. The events of September 11th itself brought home to me just how important it was to continue the process of restructuring and reforming the INS. An experience during those first hours after the attacks convinced me that I could not take my eye off the ball of the restructuring. As I mentioned in my written testimony, the INS was responsible for suggesting to the Attorney General that federal law enforcement agencies should provide agents to supplement security at airport checkpoints. We offered up 300 Border Patrol agents as the first contingent, and in fact, we had 317 agents on the ground at 9 airports beginning within 36 hours of the attacks. When the President approved this initiative at the suggestion of the Attorney General, and we set about mobilizing our agents, it came to my attention that the Chief of the Border Patrol was not actually in charge of the Border Patrol. You can imagine my amazement at that. But given this reality, it was also obvious to me that it would take days or even weeks to work our way through the bureaucratic decision-making process. I quickly suspended the established chain of command, put the Border Patrol chief in direct command, and we started moving agents to the airports immediately. In April 2002, after finally receiving reprogramming authority from the House and Senate Appropriations Committees to start the restructuring, the first change I announced as as the first part of Phase 1 was the permanent realignment of the Border Patrol chain of command to put the Chief of the Border Patrol as its actual operating head. As we were preparing to implement Phase 2 of the restructuring, the President announced his Homeland Security Department initiative, and we altered our process to blend in with that initiative. It was clear to me that in the now hot war on terrorism, we had to simplify and clarify our command and management structure. We had to impose accountability and performance standards, and we had to upgrade and integrate our technology. As noted in my written testimony, on September the 14th, 3 days after September 11th, I gave clear directions to my senior staff that we were not going to drop the ball on restructuring. On October 3rd, we briefed the Attorney General on the plan and got his sign-off to submit it to the White House for review. On November the 14th, we submitted it to the Congress. What this Commission and the American people need to understand and appreciate is that the scope of the duties and mandates imposed on the INS far exceeded the resources that Congress had made available to it for many years. Even though the budget of the INS began to increase in the early 1990s, primarily to hire more Border Patrol agents for the southwest border, things such as interior enforcement, technology improvements, integration of information systems, benefits processing, adequate expansion of detention and removal capabilities, and a host of other important functions were the subject of neglect, benign and otherwise. Yet even if Congress had supported and funded all of the things that should have been done, I doubt whether that would have prevented the events of September the 11th. The real failure was, in my personal opinion, a failure to gather intelligence information, analyze it, and disseminate it to the points, including especially the INS and the Department of State, where it could be used to thwart terrorists. Since I wasn't part of the pre-September 11th structure, I can't speak directly to those issues. However, I have a keen grasp of the obvious, and it was abundantly obvious to me that September 11th was, in most part, an intelligence failure. It's also obvious to me that the next terrorist attack will be prevented by constantly improving our intelligence gathering capabilities and the development of modalities for the rapid dissemination of usable intelligence information for those on the front line. If our first encounter with a terrorist is when he or she comes and shows up at the border, and we don't know or suspect that he or she is a terrorist, then we've lost the battle. As good as the people are who work for Commissioner Bonner at Customs and Border Protection, and they are good, they are not mind readers. They must have the information and tools necessary to make the split-second decisions that we expect of them. And they must be thoroughly trained to know exactly what it is they're looking for. In the near-term aftermath of the attacks on September 11th, we took a number of important steps, including, among others, the identification of the hijackers, which was a process that actually went on over several days. The first process was just to look at the seating charts on the airplanes, figure out who probably they were, check them against entry records. So you had a pretty good idea, but from there then you had to confirm who it was. And that's where, frankly, as I mentioned in my testimony, where I saw the lack of interconnection of our information systems, because the actual confirmation of who they were was contained in records that were in the records center and district offices, things like that. So we really had we identified them immediately, but then we really had to confirm who they were.
It's not to wrap up, please, Mrs. Ziglar. Running a little late, long on time.
I'm sorry. I beg your indulgence. I have a couple other things I'd love to say.
As fast as possible.
The assignment of 1,000 of our special agents to the FBI. We disseminated a departure list. We deployed more inspectors to the northern border. We accelerated the existing northern border strategy of the Border Patrol and started to move toward reaching the 969 Border Patrol agents that we wanted or we had established as a goal at the northern border. We developed what turned out to be exactly 50 potential initiatives for the Attorney General, and we also put on warp speed the development of our information enterprise architecture for the INS. And I'm pleased to note that we got that done on my watch. Perhaps the most important thing we did, though, was to go to threat level 1, which we did in coordination with the Customs Service. There are a number of protocols, and I won't go through those because I'm trying to wrap it up, sir. Needless to say, though, the threat level 1 at the border created enormous backups, and we had to work pretty hard. It's still a challenge, I think, out there to try to get those backups down to not impede commerce and the flow of people across those borders, and we worked, I think, very cooperatively with the Customs Service. The lessons from this experience for me were, one, we must develop surge capacity at the border in order not to have events like this have such draconian impacts. And the second is that we must move as many functions and inspection functions as far away from the border as we possibly can so we don't have this physical border problem that we've got. Protecting the American people, enforcing our immigration laws, and protecting our economy are extremely important. But when these goals have impact or perceived impact on the agendas of various groups, the goals get lost in the noise. Let me give you one example because I have to take full responsibility for this controversy. In March 2002, I proposed that we should reduce the default period of admission for B-2 visitors to 30 days from the then existing default period of 6 months. In layman's language, a visitor to the United States is usually granted admission for 6 months stay unless the immigration inspector decides to make it shorter. Generally, the 6-month default is what you get when you come in. My view was that this length of stay exacerbated the problem we had with overstays and that we made it easy for people like the 9/11 hijackers to come in and to do their thing for 6 months while we didn't even know where they were. My view was that the default period should be 30 days and that if someone had a legitimate reason to stay longer, they would present it to the inspector and the inspector would give them an extended stay, but not exceeding 6 months. It seemed clear to me that combining these tighter controls with an entry-exit system that would tell us when they came and went would give us better control over the people who came here with an intent to overstay, as well as it put a little tightening on the people who were here with evil intent. The Department of Justice supported my view, and on April 22nd, we proposed those regs. You would have thought that I had committed treason. An untold number of congressmen, governors, no offense, Governor, mayors, and travel industry representatives were outraged. The horror stories about people having to sell their houses in Florida who came from Canada because they can only stay here for 30 days, the stories about grandparents not being able to visit their grandchildren because they could only stay 30 days, all of these things were just blown out of proportion. There were congressional hearings, and even though we plainly stated that people would be granted stays longer than 30 days for legitimate reasons, the hysteria was rampant. The irony was that a lot of the people who were bashing us for being too lax were the people that were on our case about this one. I should note that those regulations were withdrawn after I retired. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I want to emphasize that our priorities at the INS during my tenure were focused on improving the performance of the agency in the war on terrorism and in the enforcement of our immigration laws, as well as providing the services to which people are entitled under our laws. These goals can be achieved through better management structures, enhanced employee morale and productivity, obtaining adequate resources, and vastly improving our information technology systems. The achievement of these goals require patience, hard work, and political support. The implementation of programs such as SEVIS and U.S. Visit won't mean much if the whole spectrum of things that need to be done is ignored. We can bring our immigration system under control, consistent with our legacy as a nation of immigrants and our dedication to being a free and open society. But it will take much work and thoughtful, mature analysis and decision-making. Thank you.